Thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to share the project. Johnston McMaster, who's the progenitor of this project, couldn't be here, so I'm a bit of a poor substitute for Johnston. But don't tell him that, because I keep telling him how lucky he is to work with the Junction. So I suppose the Junction, it's a community relations peace building initiative, and it was set up in 2000, and it is about focused community relations work. Just to talk about the beginnings of the project, Johnston McMaster, we asked him to write a paper for our Towards Understanding and Healing project back in 2008, and it went into a chapter in a book, and it was about ethical remembering, and it was about this decade of centenaries. So, slow learners, it was 2010 when I approached him and said, maybe we should be doing something about this upcoming decade of centennial events, the significance because of the impact on contemporary Ireland today and the politics, everything across the whole of Ireland. And we started to develop a strategy and a business plan, so to speak. So eventually then we formulated this project, and we got funding from the Columbanus Community Trust, and as a result of that we launched it in September in 2010. Following on to that, Duncan Morrow was very much behind the scenes helping us out, and then I know the Community Relations Council and the Heritage Lottery Fund, they set up the decade of anniversaries shortly after that, giving it an even higher profile at the time. So at the very start we were working very much at a limited budget and part-time, but Johnston, being the prolific writer, had already started to build up the resources, and it gave us a really good quick start. So I suppose I want to just say we run a project called the Towards Understanding and Healing project, and that's about dealing with the past through storytelling and positive encounter dialogue, and there's a connection between that and ethical and shared remembering. Its relevance to this presentation is that it deals with the individual lived experience of the more recent past, and it addresses the transgenerational legacy of the recent violence. The Ethical and Shared Remembering project, on the other hand, grapples with a communal narrative around the events of 100 years ago, and that groupings, communities and sections of society, civil society tell to bring meaning and purpose to their way of being and justification for their current mindsets and actions. So the project was launched in September 2010, as I said, and since then, following a very successful application to the Columbanus, we started a 3-year education project. So this is a little bit about what we did. So what I'm going to do is show you what the project is about, and really on your briefing, Sean, look at the achievements to date and then what has emerged out of that. And I'm really pleased to be following Alan McCulley, because what he was saying about the curriculum very much fits with the work that we are doing and the following from that. So what are we looking at here? The decade of commemorations, hugely significant events that shaped contemporary Ireland. And you can look, signing of the Ulster Covenant. I've also put in things like the Church League for Women's Suffrage, the Irish Catholic Women's Suffrage Association. Then we had the Great War, we had the Easter Rising and Proclamation and the Battle of the Somme, the Anglo-Irish War, the Government of Ireland Act, the Anglo-Irish Treaty, Partition and Civil War. And we'll look a little bit more at those as we go on. So within that, what is it that we're doing within this project? This is not working. Okay. So we're trying to understand the legacy of that time. The legacy of the decade is explored through the following, highlighted as not only past, but current themes. So we're looking at this project, and we use the decade as a prism to look at the unresolved issues of today. The nationalism of the time, which was a late 18th century, early 19th century invention. We look at identity, religion, violence, trauma, equality, class, including labour relations, feminism of that time, and then the literary culture, how that shaped and informed the thinking of that time. So, and I will go back to those. So first of all, a framework for the guiding principles, which are requirements for ensuring that the forthcoming commemorations are inclusive, non-sectarian and non-divisive, and have a lasting positive impact on good relations. And we've based the project on 5 key values or principles. To remember in context, and I will go back to these and just explain them a little more. Remembering in context, remembering the whole decade, remembering the future, remembering ethically, and remembering together. So first of all, remembering in context. So to remember the past as though it was the present, it's an irresponsible way of remembering. To remember honestly and ethically means entering into the world and context of the past. This was an era of imperialism, expansionism, and 3 emperors. It was an era of nationalism, a dominant political invention of the late 18th, early 19th century. There was high-profile religion, Christendom, and the marriage of church and state. We had the suffragette movement of the time and women's rights and how that actually influenced the outcomes of the politics. And then we had the labour movement, 1907 and 1913 lockouts and the birth of the trade unions. And we also had very deep class divisions that still exist today. So you can see that at that time what's carried over to the unresolved issues. So remembering the whole decade. In the context of contested histories and community sectarian divisions, there will be a temptation for each side to remember its own events, but one event led to another. Remembering whole, however difficult, is an ethical and honest approach to acknowledging the past and learning from history. Remembering the future, and this is a different way of learning. The political agreements have committed us to building a different and shared future. A future in which reconciled relationships, social justice and equality and active non-violence will be paramount in a global interdependent context. In this context, we work from future vision to present to past. Remembering the future is a different way of remembering. So remembering ethically. And ethical remembering is critical remembering. It's not about blaming, but it is about raising critical ethical questions about the use of violence to deal with differences and the resolution of or defence of political objectives or causes. And some of the things that Alan was talking about, asking those critical questions about violence, change, justice and peace in the context of the present and desired shared future. And then 100 years on, there will be no ethical remembering without remembering the future and without an ethical and concrete commitment to building it together. So, and I'm running through this simply because if I don't script it, I'd be talking here for hours. Ethical principles. So the ethical remembering also underlines the need for hospitality, a generous openness to each other, to dialogue, hear each other, and be prepared to walk through contested histories together. Such hospitality in relation to the events of 1912 to 1923 is three-dimensional. And we look here at narrative hospitality. We need to be open to hearing many more stories than our own. Narrative of flexibility, acknowledging the multiple narratives that exist and being open to and discovering understandings and fresh interpretations of the various events. And narrative of plurality, acknowledging that Irish histories and stories are told from different historical and experiential perspectives. Even the same event can be recounted differently. And some of this stuff was brought together through Paul Ricoeur and John Carney. So we've references to good models that have helped us to shape this project as well. So remembering together, and I know a lot of people ask about this, but it is walking through history together, creating spaces to explore a shared past and walking in the other person's shoes. And to remember solo is to distort the decade. It's to skew memory and risk another replay of political violence. Walking through our histories together may be the only liberating option if we want to learn from the past. So those are some of the guiding principles. We have developed a little book here which gives us a framework, an outline of the principles, asks some critical and ethical questions. It also talks about, are we history makers or history commemorators? And it poses a lot of challenging questions within this. And I have brought a little copy of the booklets. So what have we achieved to date? We've engaged with 10,000 plus. I keep revisiting this and telling everybody a different number, but I can't. At the start, we actually numbered approximately 7,000, then it went up, and then Johnston does a thought for the day, so he kept bringing it into that. So we had lots of extra voices engaged with us directly. We've been doing conferences, seminars, courses, workshops and training. We have engaged quite a lot with the politicians. Every party, including MLAs, we've actually been involved in policy formation with one of the political parties. We have engaged with the statutory bodies and Peace 3 clusters. There are a number of them that have actually undertaken the guiding principles. We've engaged a lot with faith communities and interchurch communities, the formal and informal education sector, the community and voluntary sector, and we've also been involved in that policy implementation. So that has been really effective. The Archbishop of Canterbury recently asked for the resources and asked for permission to use them, so hopefully that's going to the heart of what's happening over in Westminster as well. And the Taoiseach as well, with you know, and the Department of Foreign Affairs, public acknowledged the project as well. So we've developed training resources. We have a manual here and a DVD. The manual has got 14 huge modules here, and it's the format of worksheets. So it takes you, the trainer, through the format of a workshop. It gives them the background detail of what they need or could know before they develop or talk to the workshop, and then it gives you bullet points, and that's what you deliver. So it's in a very simple format of a very complex and difficult subject matter, and we have a DVD that further explains that and makes it more visual. We also have 6 booklets developed which complements the resource manual, and we have a number of books. Signing the Covenant, which is already done, and Book on the Rising is to also be covered. We have a huge book on profiling women of the decade, personalities of the decade, which is about the nationalist, Republican, Unionist and British connections. So that's really interesting when you talk about the complexities. When you engage with the personalities of the decade, you get underneath what it was that drove them, and that ethical analysis. Who were the characters? What were their motivations? What were the actions and policies of the time? And then ultimately, as you were talking about, Alan, the consequences of all of those actions. So we actually get under the skin and we engage with people and we bring that history alive. The Profiling Woman book that Cathy Higgins has written, it actually does the personalities in the first sense, so that you have a person talking, like Lady Theresa Londonderry, about what it was like for her. And so it takes you on another journey. And no matter what side of the house that you claim to be on, it actually allows you to get into the person and understand the person better. So what has emerged for us and the work that we've been doing and the training, we've actually trained 49 trainers. We ran out 2 pilot training programs so that people could disseminate the information widely. So there's a few things that have emerged for us. Participants know little or nothing about the decade, and a lot of people come on board to do the courses or the training to say, I know nothing about my side of the history, let alone the other side. So the very fact that they categorise that, that has been very interesting. Or they hold versions of what happened, and that's very much related to the sectarian narratives and identities that bedevil us. They've been very appreciative of hearing all sides of the story. That has been a really interesting thing, where people come along and say, I knew about the Covenant, but I had no knowledge about the Easter Rising, or I knew about the Battle of Somme. So that's been interesting for them to, engage in that level. And then engaging with the events of 100 years ago, that has proved invaluable in dealing with the more recent raw conflict. The programme is providing a prism for people to look at the recent phase of violence and the processing of that recent phase of violence. And it also makes the inextricable linkage between what happened at the beginning of the 20th century and what happened at the end of it. And as you say, Alan, that ongoing dialogue between the past and the present. Because when you're sitting in the room working with a group, they're right in the present and making connections all the time. There's been a growing concern about the upcoming commemorations and how they will be remembered. So it is, you know, people are more aware, and there has been so much promotion at different levels of commemorative events. You know, there's an acknowledgement of how the past commemorations have contributed to the preservation of the sectarian narrative, and that has been a reality for us. Participants express a unique opportunity within the decade to approach the decade and do things differently, to remember the future. And all of the courses and training, you know, participants are saying, how do we change the future? How do we have a different future? And this has allowed them to think differently. And it is also stimulating interest in what happened in the decades before and after that crucial period in time. So it's really interesting that, you know, we are so flat out drawing up resources, and Johnson's coming back and saying, I have to write between 1922 and 1960, or what led up to it. So it's stimulating people's interest about, well, what happened, what led up to that, what came after that, you know. So that has been really interesting. So what has emerged for me, whenever I was out giving some talks or, you know, papers at different things, I was at a big conference with 200 women there recently that Derek Poole had organised, and I talked a bit about the patriarchy, and I talked about the violence of the recent past and women, and it created so much interest. So many people came up to me afterwards, and then following that there's been a lot of conversations of people saying, women in particular, saying that we really need to know more about patriarchy. And in the course module it takes us right back to Aristotle and Cicero. Takes us right back to the, you know, how patriarchy became embedded, how it was the first difference made between racism, between ethnicity, between colour, anything. It's right back to, you know, the difference between men and women. And it's trying to get our head around violence in women throughout the world that still happens today, but linking it here. And you know what, there's so many people who are still so fearful to even talk about the violence in women here. And yet we opened the door just a little way, and I was almost afraid because I couldn't close it then, you know, so many people coming forward. So in order for us to address what's happening in the here and now, we feel the need to contextualise it with the bigger picture, the bigger global picture, so that women can identify to what's happening to them, because sometimes they don't see that it's violence against women. You have to be loyal to the boys. You do this because you're fighting for your country and stuff like that there. So there's a lot of stuff that's emerging. So we've actually developed a patriarchy course, patriarchy, violence and gender-based justice, to allow the opening of that door. And already we're oversubscribed and we haven't put it out. And the lovely thing is we've had 9 men signed up within 2 days of hearing about it, you know, so that's really good. The interdisciplinary approach, you know what you were saying, Alan, about history not alone. This is an interdisciplinary approach where it does engage the politics, history, psychology, theology, philosophy, and also bringing in the gender and the culture, and that's about the culture and the literature of the time. And that's been liberating for many participants, that they can get their head around it whenever they look at different approaches. And also another thing for us is that when we were doing the course and doing the training, we had people saying, you can't deal with the Civil War, it's too recent. And we're asking people to deal with a more recent conflict, and yet 100 years ago was too raw for some people. And that has been really interesting. And I know that Seamus and myself did a lot of work, Seamus in particular, down across Donegal, both formal and informal, and it stimulated a lot of interest and a lot of debate. So again, one of the other things that came for us, there's a huge hunger for knowledge. Whenever we've started, there's been so many people, young people and adults, coming along to hear and learn more about their history. Sometimes they haven't really taken it on board, Sarah, at school. They haven't really engaged with it, but then when they've left, they realise the importance of placing them as to who they are and why they are the way that they are. We've been working with young people who have been involved in bands. Some of them have been on protests, and that has been really good for us. We have also got 4 more bands groups lined up, myself and Seamus, and that's, you know, in Strabane and Derry, which has been really interesting because so many young people are wanting to know their history. Protestant young people, I don't know what you're saying, so true. They're struggling, and they've been very attentive. They are just eating the literature that we're handing out, and they're wanting more, and that has been really hopeful for us. And then there's also the work in schools, and that needs to be an in-school and whole-school engagement. And Seamus did work in the formal education down in Donegal, and I know that Johnson and Cathy have done quite a lot in schools. And they've said at times that there hasn't been any development of critical thinking. They just don't have the questions to ask. So they sit, so you don't know if they're absorbing it or what's happening with it. And we've done work up in Bangor as well, so there's been quite a lot of work. So what is ongoing? We're going to do 2 training of trainers planned for this year, and then people can access the resources. We have 2 pilot training programs on patriarchy, violence and gender-based justice, hopefully in the pipeline as well. And then we're also doing the usual training courses, and that's evening to fit in with groups. So we respond to groups and different sectors asking for information, workshops and training courses. And we're working with the Rural Community Network at the moment and a number of other organisations to roll it out. And we continue to develop resources.